November in New York meant brutal cold that cut through cheap fabric like it wasn't there. I'd been on my feet for 14 hours straight, serving overpriced pasta to tourists who tipped like they were doing charity work. My uniform smelled like garlic and desperation, and all I wanted was to collapse into bed at my studio apartment and forget this day existed. The back door of Rossetti's Bistro opened into an alley that smelled perpetually of garbage and broken promises. I'd taken this route 1,000 times. But tonight something was different. Laughter echoed off the brick walls, the kind that made my skin crawl. Sharp and cruel, the sound of people enjoying someone else's pain. I should have kept walking. Smart people in this city knew when to mind their business. I'd never been accused of being particularly smart. 3 teenage boys had surrounded someone smaller, their phones held high, recording. The blue glow from their screens illuminated a child, maybe 8 or 9 years old, wearing what had probably been an expensive private school uniform before it got soaked through and streaked with mud. The kid was crying, not the loud wailing kind, but the silent, hiccuping sobs that came from pure terror. "Come on, rich boy," one of the teenagers jeered, shoving the kid toward another. "Where's your mommy and daddy now? Can't buy your way out of this one?" The child stumbled, hitting the wet pavement hard. His hands scraped across concrete, and fresh tears streamed down his face. My bags hit the ground before I'd consciously decided to move. "Hey!" My voice came out harder than I'd intended. Years of dealing with drunk customers and handsy managers packed into that single syllable. Back the hell away from him. The 3 boys turned, and I got my first good look at them. 17, maybe 18, wearing designer sneakers and jackets that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Rich kids slumming it, looking for entertainment. "This doesn't concern you, lady," the tallest one said. But his voice wavered. Good. He should be scared. I pulled out my phone, angling it at them. "Really? Because it looks like you're assaulting a child and posting it online. That's funny because I can see your faces really clearly. And look at that. Your friend there has a varsity jacket with a name on it. St. Augustine Preparatory. How helpful." The kid with the jacket, Marcus, according to the embroidery, went pale. "We were just messing around." "Messing around?" I moved between them and the crying child. "You were terrorizing someone half your size and filming it for your little social media circus. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to delete those videos, you're going to give me your names, and then you're going to disappear before I decide whether involving the cops is worth my time." "You can't," the 3rd boy started. "I took screenshots of your faces in that jacket already." I lied smoothly. "They're uploading to my cloud right now. So you can either cooperate, or tomorrow morning your school, your parents, and every college you're applying to gets to see what kind of people you really are. Your choice." The reality of consequences hit them all at once. They scrambled to delete videos, stammering out names I immediately memorized, then practically ran from the alley, their expensive sneakers splashing through puddles. I turned to the child, who had curled into himself against the brick wall, shaking so hard I could hear his teeth chattering. Rain had plastered his dark hair to his forehead, and his eyes, when they met mine, were huge and terrified. "Hey," I said softly, crouching down to his level but keeping some distance. Cornered animals bit, and traumatized kids weren't much different. They're gone. You're safe now. He didn't respond, just stared at me like he couldn't quite process that the threat had vanished. His breathing was coming too fast. Panic attack territory. I'd seen this before. My mother, during her final months with cancer, had panic attacks that left her gasping and disoriented. The therapist had taught me techniques, ways to ground someone when their mind was spiraling. Without thinking about how expensive my coat probably was compared to my bank account, I shrugged it off and draped it around his small shoulders. Then I did something that probably broke every stranger danger rule in the book. I sat down on the wet, cold pavement beside him, not hovering, not demanding anything, just present. "You don't have to talk," I told him quietly. "You don't have to do anything. Just breathe with me, okay? In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. I demonstrated, exaggerating my breathing so he could follow. He watched me, his chest still heaving. But slowly, incrementally, he began to match my rhythm. Minutes passed. The rain kept falling, soaking through my uniform, but I didn't move. I started humming, barely aware I was doing it until the melody registered. An old Italian lullaby my mother used to sing, before the cancer stole her voice. I'd hummed it to her in those final weeks when she couldn't sleep, when the pain was too much for words. The child's breathing steadied. His shaking began to subside. He pulled my coat tighter around himself, and something in his posture shifted from pure panic to exhaustion. "Kayla." Brittany's voice cut through the sound of rain. My coworker and closest friend in this city appeared in the alley entrance, her blonde hair darkening under the downpour. "What the hell are you doing out here? I've been looking everywhere." She stopped, taking in the scene. Me, soaked and sitting in a puddle. The child, wrapped in my coat, still trembling. "Oh my God, is he okay?" "Some kids were bullying him," I said. "Filming it. I handled it." Brittany knew that tone. It meant I'd done something reckless, and probably right. She moved closer, her bartender instincts kicking in. Should we call someone? Police? His parents? Before I could answer, the sound of engines roared into the alley. 3 black SUVs, the kind with windows tinted so dark they looked like they absorbed light, screeched to a halt at the alley entrance, blocking any exit. "Kayla," Brittany whispered urgently, grabbing my arm. "We need to go. Now." But it was too late for that. Doors flew open, and men poured out. 6, 7, maybe more. They wore dark suits that somehow remained crisp despite the weather, and every single one of them moved with the fluid purpose of people trained for violence. And they were all armed. I could see the bulges under their jackets, the way their hands hovered near concealed weapons. Luca. One of them, built like a linebacker with a scar running down his jaw, rushed forward. His face transformed from professional menace to genuine relief when he saw the child. "Thank God. Sir, we found him." "Sir." My stomach dropped. The last man to emerge from the lead SUV didn't rush. He didn't need to. The others parted for him automatically, an unconscious acknowledgement of hierarchy that spoke volumes. He was tall, probably 6'2" or 6'3", with the kind of build that came from discipline rather than vanity. Dark hair swept back from a face that belonged on Roman coins, all sharp angles and aristocratic features. His suit was charcoal gray, perfectly tailored, probably worth more than every piece of clothing I'd ever owned combined, but it was his eyes that held me frozen, dark, almost black, and currently locked onto me with an intensity that made breathing difficult. Those eyes swept over me, cataloging every detail. My soaked uniform, my position on the ground beside his son, the protective way I'd angled myself between the child and potential threats. "Luca," he said, and his voice carried the kind of authority that made powerful men nervous. "Come here." The boy, Luca, scrambled up and ran to him. The man caught him, lifting him easily despite the mud and rain, holding him close in a way that softened every harsh line of his face. "Papa, she helped me," Luca managed, his voice rough from crying. "The boys, they were—" "I know." "Shh, it's okay now." The man's hand cupped the back of Luca's head, protective and gentle. Then his gaze returned to me, and the gentleness evaporated. "Who are you?" I stood slowly, very aware of the armed men watching my every move. Brittany had gone rigid beside me, her hand still gripping my arm like a lifeline. "Nobody," I said. "Just someone who doesn't like seeing kids get hurt." "Nobody?" He repeated the word like he was tasting it, finding it wanting. "You intervened when multiple assailants were attacking my son. You stayed with him until we arrived. That's not nobody." The way he said my son carried weight. Possession, yes, but also warning. This child was his, and anyone who touched Luca, for good or ill, became his concern. One of the men stepped forward, the same one who'd called out first. "Sir, should we—" "Get Luca to the car. Dry clothes. Call Dr. Reeves. Have her meet us at home." The man's orders were crisp, automatic. Then to Luca, "Go with Marco. I need to speak with this woman." "But Papa—" "Now, Luca." The boy went, but kept looking back at me. Marco, the linebacker, wrapped Luca in a jacket and guided him toward the middle SUV, speaking in low, soothing tones, which left me facing the man who terrified everyone around him, while Brittany's fingernails dug into my arm hard enough to bruise. "My name is Anthony Ferraro," he said, and I watched recognition flicker across Brittany's face. She knew that name. Whatever it meant, it wasn't good. "You helped my son when he was in danger. That creates a debt." "There's no debt," I said quickly. Any decent person would have done the same thing, but they didn't. His gaze flicked toward the restaurant, the busy street beyond. How many people walked past this alley tonight? How many heard him crying and kept going? He had a point, but accepting that meant accepting whatever came next. "Look, I'm glad he's safe. That's all that matters. I should get home." "Your name," Anthony Ferraro said, not a request. Every survival instinct screamed at me to lie, to give a fake name and disappear into the city's anonymity, but I'd already been seen by a dozen armed men. My co-worker stood beside me. I worked at a restaurant 50 feet away. The time for anonymity had passed the moment I'd opened my mouth in this alley. "Kayla Grant. Kayla Grant," he repeated, and somehow hearing my name in his voice made it sound different. Significant. "How long have you worked at Rossetti's?" 3 years. Confusion mixed with my fear. Why does that matter? Everything matters. He pulled out his phone, typed something quickly. One of his men approached, whispered in his ear. Anthony nodded once. "You're 26. You work doubles 4 nights a week. You're paying off medical debt from your mother's cancer treatment. You live alone in Queens." Ice flooded my veins. "How the hell do you know that?" "I make it my business to know about people who interact with my son. No apology, no shame." He'd investigated me in the span of minutes. "You could have called the police. Instead, you personally confronted 3 teenagers and sat in the rain with a traumatized child. Why?" "Because he needed someone," I said, anger finally overriding fear. "And I'm not going to apologize for basic human decency." For the first time, his expression shifted. Not quite a smile, but something in his eyes warmed fractionally. "No apology necessary. As I said, you've created a debt. I always repay what I owe. I don't want—" "You'll hear from me soon, Miss Grant." He turned to leave, then paused. "The boys who hurt Luca? You have their names?" Red flags erupted in my mind. "I'm not giving you names so I can ensure they face appropriate consequences through legal channels," he interrupted smoothly. "I'm not a monster, despite what you're clearly thinking. But those boys need to learn that actions have repercussions." I hesitated, then rattled off the 3 names I'd memorized. If he could find out my entire life history in 5 minutes, he could track down 3 rich kids from St. Augustine Prep. Anthony Ferraro nodded, committed them to memory with the same efficiency I had. "Go home, Miss Grant. Get warm. And be careful walking alone at night. Not everyone in this city is as fortunate as Luca was tonight." Then he was gone, sliding into the lead SUV with fluid grace. The vehicles pulled away in perfect synchronization, leaving Brittany and me standing in the rain-soaked alley. "Kayla," Brittany breathed, her voice shaking. "Do you have any idea who that was?" "Anthony Ferraro," I repeated dumbly. "He seemed intense." "Intense? Jesus Christ, Kayla." She pulled me toward the restaurant's back entrance. "Anthony Ferraro runs half the organized crime in this city. The Ferraro family, She lowered her voice even though we were alone. "They're Mafia. Real, actual Mafia." The ground felt unsteady under my feet. It can. And you just saved his kid." Brittany's eyes were wide with a mixture of terror and awe, which means you're either the luckiest person alive or you just made the biggest mistake of your life. I looked down at my soaked uniform, my empty hands where my coat used to be, and thought about a little boy's terrified eyes finding relief in a stranger's face. "I'd do it again," I said quietly. "I know." Brittany squeezed my shoulder. "That's what scares me." We grabbed our things and left through the back, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Twice on my subway ride home, I caught glimpses of a dark sedan that might have been following. My apartment building's usual shadows felt heavier, populated with threats I couldn't see but knew were there. I locked my door, engaged the deadbolt, and stood under a scalding shower until my skin turned red and the shaking finally stopped. Anthony Ferraro's words echoed in my mind. You'll hear from me soon. I'd lived in New York for 3 years, perfecting the art of being invisible. Working my shifts, paying my debts, keeping my head down, and my life small and safe. In one impulsive act of decency, I'd put myself on the radar of a man who commanded fear with just his presence. As I lay in bed, exhaustion pulling me under, I couldn't decide if I'd saved Luca Ferraro tonight, or if I'd been the one who needed saving all along. Tuesday morning started with the realization that I hadn't imagined any of it. The black sedan was still parked across from my building, same position it had held since I'd gotten home the night before. A different driver sat behind the wheel, but the message was identical. We're watching you. Brittany called before my alarm even went off. Please tell me you're alive. Alive and thoroughly creeped out, I said, peering through my window blinds at the car below. There's someone watching my apartment. Of course there is. She sounded exhausted, like she hadn't slept either. Kayla, I spent half the night researching Anthony Ferraro. The things this man is connected to. I don't want to know, I interrupted, because that felt safer somehow. Ignorance as protection. I helped his kid. That's it. This will blow over. Will it? Brittany's skepticism came through clearly. Because men like that don't just forget. She was right, but admitting that meant acknowledging I'd fundamentally changed my life in one impulsive moment. So instead, I promised to be careful and headed to work, hyper-aware of the sedan that followed at a discreet distance. Wednesday brought more of the same. The car changed, a dark blue SUV this time, but the surveillance remained constant. Other servers at Rossetti's started noticing the men who nursed single espressos for hours, always positioned where they could watch the entrance. Marco, our floor manager, pulled me aside during lunch rush. Kayla, is everything okay? Some of the staff are worried about the, increased attention on you. Translation. You're scaring customers and making everyone nervous. I couldn't exactly explain that I'd accidentally gotten involved with a crime family, so I mumbled something about an overprotective ex and promised it would resolve soon. I didn't believe that any more than he did. Thursday evening shattered any hope that Anthony Ferraro would simply move on with his life. I was taking orders at a corner booth when the entire restaurant went quiet. Not the natural lull between conversations, but the heavy silence that comes when something dangerous enters a space. Anthony Ferraro walked through the front door like he owned the building. Maybe he did. I wouldn't have been surprised to learn the Ferraro family had stakes in half the businesses in this neighborhood. He wore a navy suit today, crisp white shirt, no tie, the casual version of lethal elegance. And holding his hand, looking small and uncertain, was Luca. The child's eyes scanned the dining room until they found me, his entire face transformed, lighting up with recognition and relief. He tugged on his father's hand, pointing in my direction. Every eye in the restaurant tracked their movement toward my section. Miss Grant. Anthony's voice was perfectly polite, but beneath it ran currents I couldn't read. My son insisted on dining here tonight. He specifically requested you as our server. Luca nodded vigorously, and some of the tension in my shoulders eased. Whatever this was, at least the child seemed happy. Of course. Right this way. I grabbed menus and led them to a quiet table near the back, away from prying eyes. As I set down the menus, I couldn't help asking, "How are you feeling, Luca?" "Better than the other night." "Much better," he said softly, his voice carrying a slight accent I hadn't noticed during his panic. "Thank you for helping me. Papa says I should always thank people who are kind. Your papa's right." I smiled at him, then glanced at Anthony, who was watching this interaction with laser focus. "Can I start you with drinks?" "Water for both of us," Anthony said, "and perhaps a few minutes to look at the menu. Luca hasn't been here before. Take your time." I retreated to the server station, where Brittany immediately cornered me. "That's him. That's Anthony Ferraro." "Kayla, he's here for you." "He's here to have dinner with his son," I corrected, though my hands shook as I filled water glasses. "Right. And I'm sure it's pure coincidence he chose this restaurant." Brittany gripped my arm. "Be careful. Men like that don't do anything without a reason." I delivered the water and took their orders. Chicken parmesan for Luca, grilled salmon for Anthony. Throughout the meal, I maintained professional distance, checking in at appropriate intervals without lingering. But I noticed things. The way Anthony cut Luca's chicken into smaller pieces without being asked. How Luca talked more freely as the meal progressed, telling his father about a book he'd read, a game he wanted to play. This wasn't the cold crime boss from the alley. This was a father making time for his child. When I brought dessert, tiramisu they'd agreed to share, Luca launched into an animated description of his insect collection. "I have 43 different species," he explained, using his fork to gesture. "My favorite is the Atlas beetle. They're huge and really strong. Did you know they can lift 850 times their own weight?" "I didn't know that," I said honestly. "That's incredible. Do you keep them at home?" "In my room. I have special habitats for each type." His enthusiasm was infectious, nothing like the terrified child from 3 nights ago. "Papa says maybe we can go to the Natural History Museum next week to see their insect exhibition." "That sounds wonderful." I glanced at Anthony, who had barely touched his tiramisu, too focused on his son's happiness. After they finished, I brought the check in a leather folder. Anthony didn't even glance at it before placing a credit card inside. While I processed the payment, I felt his attention on me, heavy and assessing. When I returned with the receipt, Anthony signed it with quick efficiency, then looked up at me directly. "Miss Grant, could you spare a moment after your shift? I'd like to speak with you privately." Every warning bell in my head went off. "I'm not sure that's—" "Please." He softened the word with something that might have been genuine request rather than command. "It's important. It concerns your safety. My safety." That phrasing ensured I couldn't refuse without seeming foolish. "I'm off in 40 minutes. We'll wait." They moved to the bar area, where Luca sipped juice, and Anthony made phone calls in low tones. I finished my closing duties with trembling hands, too aware of Brittany's worried glances. "I'm calling you in 1 hour," she insisted as we clocked out. "If you don't answer, I'm calling the police." "It'll be fine," I lied. Anthony had arranged for privacy in Marco's office, a cramped space barely large enough for the desk and 2 chairs. Luca waited outside with 2 of Anthony's men, who'd materialized from wherever they'd been watching. "Thank you for agreeing to this," Anthony said once the door closed. He didn't sit, instead leaning against the desk in a posture that was probably meant to seem casual, but only emphasized his physical presence. "I wanted to thank you properly for what you did for Luca." "You already thanked me. And you don't need to." He held up a hand, stopping me. From his jacket pocket, he produced an envelope. $50,000. A gesture of gratitude. The number stole my breath. "I can't accept that." "Why not?" "Because I didn't help Luca for money." Frustration edged into my voice. "I helped him because he needed someone. You don't pay people for basic human decency." Anthony studied me like I was a puzzle he couldn't solve. "Most people in your situation would take the money without hesitation. I'm not most people." "No," he agreed slowly. "You're not." He tucked the envelope back into his jacket. "Very well. Let me propose an alternative." Here it comes, I thought. Whatever he actually wants. Luca hasn't spoken to anyone outside our immediate family since his mother died 3 years ago, Anthony said quietly. "Not to teachers, therapists, or the various specialists I've hired. But tonight, he talked to you. About insects. About school. About things that matter to him." I remembered the child's animated face, so different from the terrified boy in the alley. "He seems like a sweet kid." "He is? And he's been lost since we buried his mother." Anthony's voice carried weight, grief that hadn't fully healed. "I'm offering you a job, Miss Grant. Legitimate employment as Luca's after-school tutor and companion. 4 afternoons per week, 3 hours each session. $7,000 per month." The amount made my head spin. That was more than I made working doubles 4 nights a week, enough to finally make real progress on the $70,000 in medical debt that haunted every financial decision I made. What would this job actually entail? I asked carefully. Spending time with Luca, taking him places, engaging his interests, providing the kind of normal childhood experiences he's been missing. "You wouldn't be responsible for academic tutoring. He has teachers for that. Just companionship, guidance, someone he feels safe with." It sounded too good to be true, which meant it probably was. And what's the catch? There's no catch. Mr. Ferraro. Anthony, he corrected. Anthony, I amended, the name feeling strange in my mouth. You're asking me to become involved in your son's life, which means becoming involved in yours. Given who you are, what you do, that's not a simple proposition. His expression didn't change, but I saw acknowledgement in his eyes. You've done your research. My friend did. She's very thorough when she's worried. Smart friend. He moved closer, not threatening, just closing the distance. I won't insult your intelligence by pretending I'm something I'm not. My business interests are complex and not always legal, but I keep that world separate from Luca. He lives in safety, surrounded by normal activities and appropriate boundaries. You would never be asked to participate in or witness anything connected to my other affairs. And if I say no, then you walk away, and I'll respect that decision. He paused. But I'm hoping you'll say yes. Not for the money, though I suspect you need it. For Luca. Because whatever you did in that alley connected with him in a way nothing else has for 3 years. I thought about my mother. Those final months when connection meant everything. When someone sitting beside her, present and patient, mattered more than any medicine. I thought about my mountain of debt, the exhaustion of constant work, the narrow life I'd carved out of necessity rather than choice. And I thought about a little boy who loved insects and needed someone to listen. I need to think about it, I said finally. This is a big decision. Of course. Take the time you need. Anthony pulled out a business card, plain white with just a phone number printed in black. Call this number when you've decided. Or if you need anything before then. I took the card, our fingers brushing briefly. Can I ask you something? You can ask. Why does my answer matter so much? You could hire any number of qualified professionals. I could, he agreed. But Luca didn't respond to any of them. He responded to you. And I've learned not to question what works when it comes to my son's well-being. That night, I sat in my tiny apartment with Brittany, the business card on the table between us like a loaded gun. $7,000 a month, she said for the 3rd time. Kayla, that's life-changing money. I know. You could pay off your mom's hospital debt in a year. Maybe less. I know. But you're still scared. Terrified, I admitted. Because accepting this means accepting everything that comes with it. The surveillance, the danger, the moral complexity of working for someone who runs a crime family, Brittany finished. Yeah, that's the part that should probably make you run in the opposite direction. Should, I echoed. But Luca is a sweet kid who deserves better than being used as emotional leverage. Her tone was gentle but firm. Anthony Ferraro might be a devoted father, but he's also a criminal who investigated you without permission and is using his son to manipulate you into his orbit. She wasn't wrong. Every logical part of my brain screamed that this was dangerous, foolish, a path toward complications I couldn't predict or control. But I kept seeing Luca's face when he talked about his beetles, the spark of life that had been missing in the alley. I'm going to say yes, I heard myself say. Not because of the money, or not just because of the money, but because that kid needs someone, and for whatever reason I'm someone he trusts. Brittany sighed. I was afraid you'd say that. You think I'm making a mistake. I think you're making a choice with consequences we can't predict. She squeezed my hand. But I also know you, and you've never been able to walk away from someone who needs help. Just promise me you'll be careful. And if things get weird or dangerous, I'll leave, I promised. I'm not sacrificing my safety or ethics for any amount of money. On Sunday afternoon, I called the number on Anthony's card. He answered on the 2nd ring. Miss Grant, I'll do it, I said before I could second-guess myself. I'll work with Luca. But I have conditions. I'm listening. Total transparency about expectations. Clear boundaries around what I will and won't be exposed to. And I want everything in writing. Employment contract, terms, all of it legal and documented. Agreed. He didn't hesitate. Can you start Monday? That soon? Luca has been asking about you every day since dinner. The sooner you begin, the better. Something in his voice, a thread of vulnerability beneath the confidence, made my next question easier. He really hasn't talked to anyone else? Not like he talks to you. A pause. Thank you, Miss Grant, for giving him this chance. Monday afternoon, a car arrived at my apartment exactly at 2 p.m. Not one of the surveillance vehicles, but a sleek town car with a professional driver who introduced himself as James. The drive to the Ferraro residence took 40 minutes, moving from my neighborhood of crowded buildings and narrow streets into an area where trees lined the roads and houses hid behind gates. The Ferraro home wasn't the gaudy mansion I'd half expected. It was a large brownstone, elegant and understated, with flower boxes in the windows and a small garden visible from the street. Wealth that didn't need to announce itself. Luca met me at the door, practically vibrating with excitement. You came. Papa said you would, but I wasn't sure. I promised, didn't I? I smiled at his enthusiasm. So, are you going to show me this famous insect collection? His face lit up completely. Yes. Come on, it's in my room. I added 2 new specimens this week. He grabbed my hand and pulled me through a house that was beautifully decorated, but felt oddly empty despite its size. We passed a formal living room, a dining area, a study with walls of books. Everything pristine and perfect and somehow lonely. Luca's room was different. Here was life and chaos and personality. Posters of insects covered the walls, careful habitats lined shelves, books spilled from every surface. He showed me each specimen with reverence, explaining their characteristics, habitats, behaviors. I sat on his floor and listened, asking questions, letting him teach me. And somewhere in that first hour, something settled inside me. Maybe this was the right decision. Maybe I could actually help this child who'd lost so much. When Anthony came home 2 hours later, he found us building a fort out of couch cushions and blankets, Luca laughing as we debated the structural integrity of our design. Anthony stood in the doorway, and the expression on his face made me understand why he'd been so insistent about hiring me. It wasn't manipulation or leverage. It was hope. Pure and simple and desperately needed. Having fun? He asked, his voice softer than I'd heard before. Papa, look. We made a fortress with observation towers for beetle defense. Luca gestured proudly at our creation. It's very impressive. Anthony's eyes met mine over his son's head. Thank you, he mouthed silently. I nodded, accepting the gratitude and everything it implied. This was just the beginning, I knew. Whatever I'd stepped into would become more complicated, more entwined with Anthony Ferraro's dangerous world. But watching Luca's pure joy, seeing a father's relief, I couldn't bring myself to regret the decision. Not yet, anyway. 3 weeks passed in a rhythm I hadn't expected to find comforting. Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday afternoons belonged to Luca. And despite my initial nervousness about working for Anthony Ferraro, the actual job felt remarkably normal. We'd spend hours talking about beetles and spiders, building elaborate habitats, or reading books about entomology that Luca had accumulated in alarming quantities. But normal only stretched so far when armed men followed us everywhere. I want to take Luca to the Natural History Museum, I told Anthony one evening as he returned home early, something that was happening with increasing frequency. They have an insect exhibition he's been talking about nonstop. Anthony's jaw tightened. Public spaces are complicated. He's 8 years old. He needs experiences beyond this house. I kept my voice level, but firm. You hired me to give him normalcy. That means actually going places where normal kids go. He studied me for a long moment, and I could see the war playing out behind his eyes. Father versus crime boss, safety versus childhood, protection versus prison. Discreet security, he finally said. They'll maintain distance, but they'll be present, as long as Luca doesn't notice them. He won't. True to Anthony's word, when we visited the museum that Saturday, I spotted the security immediately. 2 men in casual clothes who never quite looked at the exhibits, always positioning themselves with clear sightlines. But Luca remained oblivious, too absorbed in displays of giant beetles and preserved butterfly collections to notice his shadows. We stood in front of an Atlas beetle specimen, Luca practically vibrating with excitement. Look at those horns. In the wild, males use them to fight for territory and mates. They can flip other beetles right over. They're impressive, I agreed, watching his face light up in a way that still felt miraculous after weeks of witnessing his transformation. Do you think you'd ever want to see them in their natural habitat? Southeast Asia, right? Papa says maybe when I'm older. His expression dimmed slightly. Mama always wanted to travel more. She had this list of places. But then, he stopped, the sentence hanging unfinished. We moved to a quieter corner near the aquatic insects display. Luca sat on a bench, suddenly smaller than his 8 years. My mom had lists too, I said softly, sitting beside him. Things she wanted to do after she got better. Places to visit, recipes to try, grandchildren she wanted to meet someday. I swallowed past the tightness in my throat. She had cancer. Fought it for 2 years before she died 6 months ago. Luca looked up at me, recognition in his eyes. Not pity, but understanding. Does it still hurt? Missing her? Every day. But it's different now. In the beginning, the pain was so big I couldn't see around it. Now it's more like I searched for words an 8-year-old would grasp. Like a stone in my pocket, always there, always heavy. But I've learned to carry it. Mama died in a car accident. His voice dropped to barely a whisper. I was there, in the back seat. The other car ran a red light and hit us on her side. His hands clenched in his lap. I kept calling for her, but she didn't answer. There was so much blood, and the sirens were loud. And Papa came, but he couldn't. His breath hitched. He couldn't fix it. Without thinking, I wrapped my arm around his shoulders. He leaned into me, not crying, just existing in the space where grief lived alongside memory. Your Papa couldn't fix it because some things can't be fixed, I said quietly. But he's still here. And he loves you more than anything in the world. I know. Luca wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. Sometimes I'm scared I'll forget what she looked like. Her real face, not just in pictures. That's normal. I worry about that too with my mom. I squeezed his shoulder gently. But you know what helps? Remembering the small things. The way she laughed, or how she said your name, or what she smelled like. Those memories stick around longer than faces sometimes. We sat there for a while. 2 people carrying stones, finding unexpected comfort in shared weight. When I brought Luca home that afternoon, Anthony met us at the door. He took one look at his son's face, peaceful but tired, and his eyes found mine with a question. We had a good talk, I said simply, about important things. Later that week, Anthony started coming home earlier, not just in time for dinner but before, while Luca and I were still in the middle of our activities. He'd loosen his tie, shed his jacket, and join us on the floor where we'd be building or reading or playing elaborate games involving insect warfare. Those evenings shifted into dinner together. The 3 of us at the large dining table that suddenly felt less empty. Luca would dominate conversation, but afterward, while he watched television or played in his room, Anthony and I found ourselves talking. Real conversations, not the careful small talk of employer and employee. He asked about my mother, about the years of treatment, about what it felt like watching someone you love fade incrementally. I asked about his wife, about their marriage, about navigating single parenthood while running an empire built on shadows. Gianna was arranged, he admitted one evening over coffee. Our families had connections, mutual interests. We married when I was 24 and she was 22, both of us fulfilling obligations. That sounds transactional? He smiled without humor. It was, for about 6 months. Then I actually saw her. Not the role she played or the alliance she represented, but her. The way she laughed at terrible jokes, how she cried during sad movies, her stubborn insistence on learning to cook despite burning everything. His voice softened. We fell in love despite the arrangement. Maybe because of it. No pretense, no games. Just 2 people trapped in the same life deciding to make it bearable together. She sounds wonderful. She was. And I failed her. The words came out flat, heavy with old guilt. I should have protected her better. Should have had more security. Should have predicted the future. I interrupted gently. Should have known a driver would run a red light at that exact moment. Anthony, you can't control everything, no matter how much power you have. His dark eyes met mine, and something cracked in his expression. I've spent 3 years trying to accept that. Most days I still can't. I maintained my shifts at Rossetti's 3 evenings a week, needing the connection to life outside the Ferraro bubble. Brittany would corner me during breaks, demanding updates with the intensity of someone watching a friend walk a tightrope. "You're falling for him," she said one night, accusation and concern mixed in equal measure. "I'm not. Kayla. I've known you for 3 years. You get this look when you talk about him, about their dinners together, about the conversations." She gripped my arm. "He's a crime boss. A actual, literal criminal. You can't just forget that because he's a good father and has sad eyes. I know what he is." But even as I said it, I wondered if I really did. The Anthony I saw with Luca, the one who came home early just to spend time with his son, who listened when I talked about my mother, who looked at me sometimes like I was solving puzzles he didn't know existed, that Anthony didn't match the monster Brittany's research had painted. "Just be careful," she pleaded. "Please, because I don't think you can walk away from this without getting hurt." The art studio revelation came on a Thursday night, 3 weeks and 4 days after I'd started working for Anthony. Luca had fallen asleep early, exhausted from a day at the botanical gardens. I'd been gathering my things to leave when Anthony appeared in the hallway. "Can I show you something?" His voice carried an uncertainty I'd never heard before. I followed him upstairs to a locked door I'd passed dozens of times without questioning. He produced a key from his pocket, fingers trembling slightly as he unlocked it. The room beyond was flooded with late evening light from large windows. Canvases covered the walls and stood propped against every surface. Paintings in various stages of completion. Landscapes, portraits, abstract pieces bursting with color. Paints and brushes remained arranged on a work table, waiting for an artist who would never return. "This was Gianna's," Anthony said, his voice thick. "Her studio. I haven't let anyone in here since—" He stopped, composing himself. "Since the funeral." I moved carefully through the space, examining paintings that revealed a talented hand and vibrant imagination. A portrait of young Luca, maybe 5 years old, caught my attention. The love in every brushstroke was palpable. She was gifted. She was everything. Anthony stood in the center of the room, looking lost. We met at an art gallery in Milan. She was there studying Renaissance techniques. I was there for a business meeting that happened to be held in the same building. She literally ran into me coming around a corner, spilled her coffee all over my suit. Despite the grief permeating the room, he smiled at the memory. The marriage was arranged 3 months later, but I'd already decided I wanted her. Spent those months figuring out how to make her want me back. He touched the edge of a canvas gently. She painted our entire courtship. Every date, every conversation, every moment that mattered. These walls are our history. I understood then what being invited here meant. This wasn't just a studio. It was a shrine, a testament, a place where grief lived in concentrated form. I should have protected her better, he said again, the guilt ever present. Should have known that car was stolen. Should have had better intelligence on threats in that area. Should have... Anthony. I moved closer, drawn by the rawness in his voice. You're not omnipotent. You're just a man who lost someone he loved. You're allowed to have failed at the impossible. His eyes found mine, and the vulnerability there made my chest ache. I don't know how to stop feeling responsible. Maybe you don't. Maybe that guilt becomes another stone you carry. And I thought of Luca on the museum bench, of my own grief still fresh and heavy. But you can't let it crush you. Luca needs you present, not drowning in what-ifs. We stood there, surrounded by a dead woman's dreams, and something shifted between us. Some acknowledgement that we'd both been touched by loss. Both carried weight we couldn't put down. My hand found his where it rested on a table edge. Just contact. Just connection. He didn't pull away. His fingers curled around mine, warm and solid and alive. Minutes passed. The light faded further, casting the studio in blue shadows. Our hands remained joined, that single point of contact somehow meaning more than words could convey. Kayla. My name and his voice sounded different. Careful. Weighted with things neither of us could say. I should go, I whispered, but didn't move. You should. He didn't move either. The tension stretched taut between us, awareness crackling in the quiet space. I became hyper-conscious of everything. His thumb tracing small circles on my hand, the way his breathing had changed. how close we were standing, the heat radiating from his body. This was dangerous, crossing lines that should remain firm, blurring boundaries that kept everything simple and professional. I pulled my hand back reluctantly. "Thank you for showing me this, for trusting me with it." Anthony nodded, the spell breaking. "Thank you for listening, for understanding." He stepped back, creating necessary distance. "I'll have James take you home." On the drive back to my apartment, I stared out the window and tried to process what had happened, the intimacy of that moment, the vulnerability we'd both shown, the connection that went far beyond employer and employee. Brittany's warnings echoed in my mind. I was getting too close, feeling too much, forgetting what Anthony Ferraro actually was beneath the grief and fatherhood. But as I lay in bed that night, unable to sleep, all I could think about was his hand in mine, and how right it had felt despite everything that made it wrong. The changes in Luca over the following weeks bordered on miraculous. He returned to school for the first time since his mother's death, initially nervous but growing more confident with each passing day. His teacher called Anthony after the first week, amazed at how engaged Luca had become during class discussions. He made his first friend, a quiet boy named Michael, who shared his passion for insects, and they spent recess trading facts about different species. Most remarkably, the nightmares stopped. Anthony mentioned it one evening as we cleaned up after dinner, his voice thick with emotion. He slept through the night, all night. That hasn't happened in 3 years. He's healing, I said simply. Kids are resilient when they feel safe. But as Luca flourished, I found myself stretched impossibly thin. Working with him 4 afternoons a week while maintaining 3 evening shifts at Rossetti's meant I barely slept, surviving on caffeine and determination. The exhaustion was catching up with me, showing in shadows under my eyes and the way my hands trembled when I poured coffee. Brittany cornered me during a particularly brutal Friday night rush. "You look like death. When was the last time you slept more than 5 hours?" "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You're working yourself into the ground." She grabbed my arm, forcing me to meet her eyes. "Kayla, you need to choose. The restaurant or the Ferraro family. You can't sustain both." She was right. I knew she was right. But leaving Rossetti's meant relying completely on Anthony for income, surrendering the independence I'd fought so hard to maintain. That Sunday, I made my decision. Anthony was in his study when I arrived, reading through documents that he smoothly turned face down when I knocked. "Kayla, is everything all right? You're not scheduled today. I need to talk to you about my schedule." I sat in the chair across from his desk, hands clasped to hide their shaking. "I'm going to leave my position at Rossetti's. The double schedule is becoming unsustainable, and Luca deserves better than someone who's half asleep during our time together." He studied me carefully. "This is a significant decision. You've worked there for 3 years. I know, but I can't do both anymore, not well." I took a breath. "Which brings me to my request. If I'm committing to this job full-time, I need the salary to reflect that reality, to cover what I'm losing from the restaurant and allow me to continue paying down my debts. What would you need?" I'd calculated the numbers a dozen times, trying to find a figure that was fair without being excessive. 10,000 a month. Anthony didn't hesitate. "Done. Just like that? Kayla, you've given my son his life back. You've done more in 6 weeks than specialists accomplished in 3 years. Whatever you need to continue doing that, it's yours." He pulled out a contract from his desk drawer, already prepared. I had my lawyer draw this up last week, anticipating this conversation. 10,000 monthly, health insurance included, all taxes properly documented, everything legal and above board. I took the document, scanning terms that were more than generous. "You knew I'd have to quit? I knew you couldn't maintain both indefinitely. And selfishly, I wanted you to choose us." His gaze held mine. "Was that wrong?" "No," I admitted. "It was practical." I signed the contract and felt something shift inside me. For the first time since my mother's diagnosis, since those crushing hospital bills had started accumulating, I could breathe. "Thank you. For this. For understanding. For..." My voice cracked. "For the first time in years, I don't feel like I'm drowning financially." Anthony came around the desk, taking my hands in his. "You shouldn't have had to carry that burden alone. I'm glad I can help lighten it now. The contact lingered longer than necessary, his thumbs brushing across my knuckles in a gesture that felt deliberate. We stood there, awareness crackling between us, before he released me and stepped back. Congratulations on your new position, Miss Grant. Thank you, Mr. Ferraro. Brittany insisted on throwing me a farewell dinner at my apartment the following Friday. She cooked pasta, opened wine, and spent the evening alternating between celebration and interrogation. So, you're all in now, she said, pouring us both another glass. Completely dependent on Anthony Ferraro for your livelihood. It's a legitimate job with a legitimate contract. That's not what I'm worried about. She settled onto my couch, fixing me with the look that meant she was about to say something I didn't want to hear. You're in love with him. I'm not. Kayla, I've known you for 3 years. I watched you date that accountant from Queens, that bartender from the East Village, even that musician who couldn't hold down a job. You never looked at any of them the way you look when you talk about Anthony. She leaned forward. You light up. Your whole face changes. And I'm terrified because falling in love with a crime boss is about the worst decision you could possibly make. I wanted to deny it, to insist she was wrong. But sitting there in my small apartment with my best friend, who'd never been anything but honest with me, I couldn't lie. I don't know what I feel, I said quietly, but it's not simple. It's not just about him. It's about Luca, too. About this family I've somehow become part of. About feeling useful and needed and wanted, Brittany supplied gently. Yes, wanted. I swallowed hard, but I'm also terrified. Because you're right about what he is, what he does. And I don't know how to reconcile caring about someone whose hands are stained with things I can't even imagine. Then maybe you need to decide if you can live with not knowing, she said, because that's what this is going to be. Loving the parts of him he shows you while ignoring the parts he doesn't. The school recital happened 3 days later. Luca had been preparing for weeks, his ocean conservation project dominating our afternoon sessions. He'd built an elaborate diorama showing marine ecosystems, complete with hand-painted species and detailed research notes. Anthony and I sat in the auditorium among other parents, watching children present their work. When Luca's turn came, he walked confidently to the front. But I saw the moment nerves hit. His hands trembled as he positioned his diorama, his voice wavering on the first few words. Anthony's hand found mine automatically, fingers threading through mine in a grip that revealed his own anxiety. I squeezed back, offering silent support. Luca found his rhythm, his passion for the subject overcoming fear. He spoke eloquently about coral reefs and ocean acidification, about endangered species and conservation efforts. Pride radiated from every word, every gesture. And through it all, Anthony held my hand, even after Luca settled. Even when the presentation ended to enthusiastic applause, he didn't let go. We sat there in the dimly lit auditorium, hands joined in full view of other parents, claiming something we hadn't acknowledged aloud. Neither of us mentioned it afterward. Not in the car ride home, not during dinner, not when Luca went to bed early, exhausted from his big day, but the awareness remained, humming beneath every interaction. The small moments accumulated like drops of water, eventually carving stone. Anthony teaching me about Italian wine one evening, our fingers brushing as he handed me a glass, the contact sending electricity up my arm. Me straightening his tie before an important meeting, my hands lingering on the silk, feeling his pulse quicken under my touch. Glances held too long across the dinner table, conversations that meant more than their surface words suggested. We circled each other like planets locked in gravity's pull, unable to collide, but impossible to separate. The turning point came on a Thursday evening. Luca had been unusually quiet during dinner, pushing food around his plate instead of eating. "What's on your mind, buddy?" I asked. He looked between Anthony and me, then asked with the devastating honesty of children, "Can Kayla be my new mom?" The silence that followed was deafening. Anthony went completely still, his wine glass frozen halfway to his lips. I felt heat flood my face, mortification, and something else. Something dangerously close to hope. "Luca," Anthony started, but the boy interrupted. "I know she's not actually my mom, and I know Mama can't come back, but Kayla is here. and she cares about me. And she makes you happy too, Papa. I see it. His eyes, so much like his father's, held surprising maturity. I just want us to be a real family. It wasn't about paperwork or last names. It was a child asking if the adults in his life would finally choose him and mean it. Anthony set down his glass carefully. Come here, son. Luca climbed into his father's lap, and I watched Anthony gather his thoughts, choosing words with visible care. There are different kinds of families, Anthony said gently. Some are born, connected by blood. Others are chosen, connected by love and respect. What we have here, the three of us, is already a family. Maybe not in the traditional way, but family nonetheless. But is Kayla going to stay? Luca's voice was small, afraid. Or will she leave like everyone else? My throat tightened. I'm not going anywhere, Luca. I promise. But what about when I'm older? What about when... He struggled with the concept. What about always? I looked at Anthony, finding his gaze already on me. The question hung between us, unspoken but deafening. What about always? How about we take things one day at a time? I suggested softly. Some promises are too big to make all at once, but I can promise that today, tomorrow, and every day after that, I can see I'm choosing to be here with you. It satisfied him, or at least gave him enough reassurance to finish dinner and head to bed. After he was asleep, Anthony found me in the garden, where I'd escaped to process the conversation's weight. I'm sorry about that, he said, joining me on the stone bench. Children don't understand boundaries. He's not wrong, though. The words escaped before I could stop them. About what's developing here, between us. Anthony turned to face me fully. Kayla, I know this is complicated. I know you're still grieving Gianna. I know your world is dangerous, and I'm probably insane for even considering. I stopped, frustrated with my own rambling, but I can't pretend anymore. I can't pretend I don't feel something when you look at me. When you hold my hand, when you talk about your life, and let me see the person beneath the reputation. I've been avoiding this, Anthony admitted quietly. Avoiding you. Avoiding these feelings. Out of respect for Gianna's memory. Yes, but also to protect you. My world isn't safe, Kayla. Caring about me puts you at risk. I'm already at risk. I became part of your world the moment I sat down with Luca in that alley. This is different. This is... He reached out, cupping my face with one hand. This is me admitting that I'm falling for you despite every reason I shouldn't. That watching you with my son makes me feel things I thought died with my wife. That you've become essential to my life in ways that terrify me. My breath caught. Anthony. But I'm also a realist. You need to understand what you'd be accepting. Not just my feelings, but everything that comes with them. The danger, the moral compromises, the life I lead outside these walls. I know what you are, I said. I've known from the beginning. And I'm terrified of what that means. Of loving someone who does the things you do. But I'm more terrified of walking away from something real because it's complicated. His thumb traced my cheekbone, the touch reverent. You deserve better than me. Maybe. But I want you anyway. The kiss happened without conscious decision, our mouths meeting in the moonlit garden. It was gentle, tentative, nothing like the passionate embraces from movies. Just two broken people finding unexpected comfort and connection, testing boundaries, discovering possibility. When we pulled apart, Anthony rested his forehead against mine. This changes everything. I know. We can't go back to pretending. I don't want to. We sat there in the darkness, holding each other, and I understood that I'd just crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Whatever came next, whether joy or heartbreak or something in between, I'd chosen this path with full awareness. 6 weeks passed in a careful dance of new boundaries and old cautions. Anthony and I navigated our evolving